Not on yet?
Now you're going live. That's good.
Now we're live.
Right.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Well, now that we just
Hold on a
talked
second.
into the thin
There's
air
no
for
one.
5 minutes.
There's no one screened in because they're on the other stream on.
Can you tell them?
Right now.
There's no one on this stream.
We are live now.
We're live.
Welcome.
Yes,
Happy
welcome
Friday.
everybody. Happy Friday.
Do we have anybody on this stream?
We have one person now. Let's go.
We had to
Hi.
switch
One's
streams? Okay, hold in there with us for a couple minutes, folks. We're having some technical difficulties here.
This will allow your wines more time to open up as well. So it's actually strategic in case you guys just open them up.
Yeah, hopefully y'all have your bottles
Give them
open.
30 minutes and we'll be ready to go and your wines will be ready to go as well.
In the meantime, happy 10th anniversary to Michelle and Rob. Thank you for tuning in with us and sharing your social media with us.
Kelly, you have to give us the green light.
There's 3 people tuned in. There's 35. They're switching over.
So we're sitting here on a Friday waiting for a major freeze to roll in. This would be our fourth freeze since what grade?
Yeah.
Fourth, yeah. So we're kind of just waiting to see how the temperatures affect us. We're looking at getting we have a frost dragon. So we're thinking about sitting on this large, essentially it's a hair dryer or 2 hair dryers. It goes through and warm the vineyard up. So that's kind of where we got one head in tasting, then another head in frost prevention. So that's kind of where we're at this Friday.
You guys see the number of how many people switched over?
I can't see.
Yeah, it's 12.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm switching streams here, folks. We're just waiting for everybody to switch over. It's some technical difficulties, so hang in there a couple more minutes with us if you can.
In the meantime, let's give them an update on Norfolk and reopen.
No, let's hold that. Yeah.
Okay.
How about the wine lineup?
Let's wait till we have
Get
it. So we're not
everybody-
going,
not repeating
we're not going
ourselves.
over it twice. So.
Sweet.
What's that, Carl?
People are switching over. Okay.
Okay. How did you get that message on the other stream?
There's a text from the computers.
Uh-huh. I wouldn't know how to do that.
It's okay. You don't need 2 cups.
I'm going to start drinking here. If
I know, look at
I already started. Nobody's looking. Nobody's looking.
Wait, don't mess your palates up before we get to taste them.
No, you're just warming them up. That's what you do.
Is that prime? Yeah, prime.
Kelly?
Hold on, keep on talking.
Okay.
Keep on talking.
Get them cards out in place of
I'm going to
running.
start dancing here in a bit. You can scare everybody
Shake some
away.
leg.
Oh, I can start singing. That would
No.
really drive me all away.
Slowly.
Just give me a live card game.
So this is our first sort of live event like this. A few years ago, Alan and I used to do tastings that we posted. I guess we didn't do them live, but we recorded them. So this is our first live. So you're having to live through our learning how to do this and getting technology right. And Kelly's going to tell us when everybody's switched over so we can go. Kelly, say hello. Kelly's behind the screen.
Hello. You're getting close.
Getting close?
Yeah.
But you know, in our email, we promised you guys an awkwardness. So here you go.
Okay. You guys can probably start.
Okay.
There's a few people that need to switch over, but they're getting there.
Okay. Well, great. Well, welcome everybody again. Not to repeat ourselves for about the 5th time. I think we talked into the camera for a while thinking we were live and we weren't. But welcome to y'all. Friday afternoon, Friday live with Rappahannock. We're going to go through kind of a geeky wine tasting, which this is modeled after what we do when we do our internal in-house tastings, when we're comparing wines, we're looking at different blends. So we'll talk to you a little bit about how we're going to do that, so follow along with us. Before I do, though, just to reintroduce everybody, Theo Smith, our winemaker, Tom Kelly, vineyard manager, Teresa, our wine club manager,
Welcome.
Sheritage, our tasting
Hello, everybody. Cheers.
extraordinaire, I'm John. My daughter Kelly back there behind the screen, and Alan's still trying to make technology work. So I don't know if he's coming back or not. He got scared away. So the way the format here is pretty simple. So as you can see, we've pre-poured ourselves these 3 wines. We'll be talking about these wines from left to right. So in the left glass, we have our Little Way Cabernet Franc. In the middle glass, we have our Glenway Cabernet Franc. And in the right-hand glass, we have our Indian Springs Cabernet Franc. So the format that we use is we stop talking, although we won't completely for your benefit, but we taste through these wines, we make our notes. If you've got pen and paper, again, if you want to be geeky with us, please follow along. If not, bottoms up and enjoy. But so we're going to go through, we're going to make our notes, we're going to each individually think about these wines so we're not influencing each other. Then we can talk about them once we've gone through that. So I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a, for the wine geeks out there like ourselves, a little bit of a tasting 101, if you will. So my recommendation is you got 3 wines in front of you. What you don't want to do is start drinking one wine, think about it, and then go to the next wine and smell and drink, and so forth. So what we're going to do, the way we go through it is we look at each wine first, look at the depth of the color of each wine. Is one darker than the other? Is one lighter? Then we're going to go through and compare aromas across the glasses before we ever put the wine in our mouths. So we're going to smell each glass, we're going to compare, we'll come back to, we'll think about it. And then once you've gone through color and aroma, then you can bring that wine into your mouth and think about everything from the entry. How are you perceiving that wine when it hits the tip of your tongue? Is there any sweetness? There's your sweet receptor. As that wine washes through your mouth, you've got your acid, and you pick up your tannins and towards the back on the sides. If there's any bitterness in the wine, you pick that up in the kind of the back middle of your palate. And then at some point, you're going to think about the finish of that wine. Is it long? Is it short? We always have cups, do a lot of spitting, although I'm one of those guys that I can't really assess a wine until I drink it all the way down. So that will be the last thing that I do. And everybody's, if a lot of times you put that wine in your mouth and breathe in a little air, you aerate it a little bit. You get the aromatics that up into your nose where you're perceiving most of your fruit and flavor components. So that's kind of, again, that's wine tasting 101. So let's see, do we have any questions, Kelly, before we get
Yes.
started?
What order should I pour the wines?
Okay, so from left to right, the question was what order to pour them. The left-hand glass in front of you is your Little Way Cabernet Franc. The middle glass is your Glenway Cabernet Franc. The right glass is your Indian Springs Cabernet Franc. So for those of you that might have just uncorked your bottles, I'm going to encourage you, go through this tasting with us, but I'm going to encourage you to come back in about an hour and retaste the wines and see how they've changed after they've opened up a bit. We apologize for not putting that out in the email, but we opened our wines about an hour ago and poured these glasses at least an hour ago.
Yeah.
Yes.
Also, we'd like to give a shout out to anyone who's sitting at home and opened all 3 bottles and is now down for the evening to commit to this. Wish we were there with you.
All right, well, we're just going to kind of jump in and we'll do a little talking along the way, which is out of character for us, but we're going to feed you some information as we go through.
Yeah, one thing that we find helps sometimes is to give you a good sense of color and structure. You can often look at the color to give you, it's just where you hold it up onto a white piece of paper against the back of a white piece of paper, and it gives us, we look right where the wine meets the glass, it's called the hue. And a lot of time you can see garnet red, you can see brick red, you can see some are lighter, some are darker, some are, some have a little bit of a brown hue, which is an indication of oxidation age. So there's all these little tidbits, these little things you can look for in wine. Before you even smell it or taste it, you can just start by looking at it. It can give you a lot of indication, a lot of detail about what may or may not be happening in the wine. So you start with, yes, looking at color first.
Tom, as we're going through these, you want to maybe talk a little about the 3 different vineyard sites?
Sure. The vineyard designations again are Little Way, Glenway, and Indian Springs. Little Way and Glenway are two of our estate vineyard blocks of Cabernet Franc. Indian Springs is one of our sister vineyards. They're located just very differently from one another. Little Way and Glenway are here on the winery property. One is in the main older vineyard, Glenway. Little Way is the younger vineyard, sort of off to the east of the winery, whereas Glenway is off to the west side of the tasting. Indian Springs is situated on the other side of Shenandoah Valley from us, on an east-facing ridge that's on the west side of the valley facing east. We here at the winery are situated more on the east side of the eastern ridge, more on the Piedmont than on the ridge. So very distinctly different locations. The two estate vineyards, the Little Way and the Glenway, their characteristics are very similar in nature. The soils are very similar. It's a diclone soil. The elevation is similar within about, I would guess, about 50 feet or so, situated right about 900 to 950 feet. The aspect is predominantly south to east to south sort of aspect. They are different. Well, we think they're different clones. The Little Way vineyard we know is a 327 clone. Glenway, we have not ever been able to figure out what that clone was. That was apparently, according to the nursery that I spoke to, they were not tracking and keeping information on clones at that time. So they're not able to tell us what clone is in the Glenway vineyard. Now, the Glenway is the older vineyard, and the Little Way is the younger vineyard. So we have more up-to-date information on the clones there. They're also on different rootstocks. The Little Way vineyard is on more vigor-reducing or dwarfing rootstocks, Riparia and 10114, and the Glenway vineyard is on a more vigor-encouraging rootstock, which was more common in the day when that was planted in 1998. John, you think you planted that?
Yep.
So at that time, the rootstocks that were available to us were a little more vigor-encouraging. Some of the other differences between those two blocks would be planting density. At the time that the Glenway vineyard was planted, the trend was to have vines spaced far apart from each other, in this case 8 feet apart, and to allow those vines to occupy all of that space. So we had big vines, and the more current trend is for smaller vines, so tighter spacings, vines spaced more closely together. So in the case of the Little Way vineyard, the spacing is 4 feet. And the row spacing is different between the two. So we have tighter rows in the Little Way vineyard than the Glenway vineyard. So much higher density planting. The part of the idea there is that the closer spacing will encourage vine-to-vine competition, root competition, so that we keep a smaller vine, which in theory will produce more densely flavored and complex fruit because of the lower yields and smaller vines. So now shifting to the Indian Springs vineyard, again, it's a completely different location. It's about a 45-minute drive from here. The elevation is roughly 1,400 feet. The soils are a Burks-Weichert loam soil, very well drained. The parent material is more of a lime shale as opposed to our more sandy sandstone type soils here. The aspect is east and south there as well, but very different elevation. Rootstock is the same as our Glenway Cabernet Franc here. The clone is 214. And again, it's an older planting. It was planted in 1997, so it's a 1 year older than our Glenway vineyard here. The vine spacing is more similar to what we've got here in Glenway as opposed to Wood. So that's kind of a snapshot of the 3 different vineyards that we're looking at.
Very nice. So I think one of the things I learned early on from a winemaker about what not to do was that a winemaker who told me it was really important, if you wanted to be a winemaker, to be very transient. You should never stay in one place for more than 3 to 5 years, because you want to be always working with new grapes and new areas, and you learn new things from different winemakers. And I think maybe part of that's true if you're just purely a winemaker, but when they're talking about vineyards, and you talk about age of a vineyard, when it's planted, when vineyards actually come into their own, and when you can start actually understanding the vineyard, it takes many, many years. And if you look at Little Way is planted in 2014. To me, tasting it next to the others, it's still quite young and edgy and nervy. It's got a lot of, there's a lot of tension in there for me, versus the other 2, which are older vines, both 98, essentially, 97 for Indian Springs, 98 planting for Glenway. But these the 2 wines to the right there, the wines number 2 and 3, they both have a they're much broader. They have much more complexity to me right now. And they seem a little bit rounder and more, not necessarily more complete, but they leave you wanting to keep coming back for more and more and more. And it leaves this nice latent finish that lingers, versus the Little Way, which I think still, these vines are still trying to figure out what they're doing. I mean, they're not even teenagers yet, and they're just they're going in many different directions. I think there is focus on the nose. I think the nose is really nice fruit. It's kind of a black cherry tart and blueberry nose. It's very, very vibrant. However, when you taste on the palate, it comes right in and it goes right through and just kind of, it fills the edges. However, it might be a little shorter on the finish versus the other 2, which kind of have this nice long finish that keep you wanting to keep revisiting everything. Not that Little Way doesn't, but Little Way just still, from the vineyard standpoint, the vineyard's still leaving us hanging. We don't really know what that vineyard is capable yet. I mean, yes, it was planted in 2014, it's 6 years old now, but this vineyard is going to be a 35, 40-year-old vineyard. It's just an infant at this point. So that's why when the winemaker told me is that you got to be transient, you got to be moving every 5 years. Well, shoot, you don't even really understand the vineyard for 5 years. So that never really made a lot of logical sense to me. And yes, Tom Kelly's my mentor as well.
Yeah, these being 2017 for Little Way, first full crop off it.
Yeah, it was
So
this
sort of came into its teenage years. This is a teenager right now. So,
yeah.
Teresa, what do you think?
I think it's awesome how you have a lot of different types of wines here that you can have for a lot of different types of meals and occasions. So, this Little Way that you say is a teenager, I mean, I would drink that in the afternoon, all by itself, whereas these other ones, don't laugh at me, Kelly. Whereas the other ones, you kind of stand up to a big steak.
So we call ourselves wine geeks, but Sharon, you wouldn't call yourself a wine geek.
Not a geek.
Wino?
Wine drinking enthusiast.
Yes. Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
My favorite's the Glenway. I'm a Glenway girl. Can't help it. That's my thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah, paired with pot roast.
Better than Meritage? Not better.
No. Nothing. Nothing's better than Meritage. I'm talking Cab Farm. Yeah, Glenway and pot roast. All of you instant pot people.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
It is nice, yeah.
So, I mean, tasting, it seems like, you have that very nice, fresh, fruity kind of element on Little Way. To me, Glenway has got much more force for kind of more earthy, more secondary characteristics. A little more dusty tannins. They're kind of wispy. They're not chewy tannins. They're really nice and they're very pleasant. They're kind of just dusty. They're there and they come and they go, but they keep kind of recoming. Versus the Indian Springs, which has like these a little bit longer chain tannins, a little more chewy on the palate, and just lingers for a bit longer. More bramble fruit, red stone fruits. There's black tea, kind of herbal note there. but definitely wine with a lot of ageability. And the way we opened these wines an hour beforehand and tasted them and came up with this tasting order of Little Way first, then Glenway, then Indian Springs, because we're trying to increase the structure and the balance of the wine as well. As you taste, you start with something nice and fruit forward. If you started in the reverse order and started with the most tannic one first and take backwards, it would be a little awkward to your palate to be able to figure out what's going on. If you typically start from kind of lesser tannin to increasing tannin, your palate will respond a little bit more appropriately. Sure.
So we have a question. Kathy wants to know what should they each pair with, according to Teresa, Little Ways for day drinking. But how about the other stuff?
Yeah, great question. Well, Sherry says pot roast.
Yeah, I think
roast.
pot roast, a little beef burgundy for the
I
second
know,
one.
I had leg of lamb last night. Cab Franc is I
For
think
which
it's
one?
sort of,
Yeah.
well, I'm sorry,
Which one?
the Glenway.
But
Yeah, I think with the Glenway sort of earthiness and a little bit of vegetable pepper character, I think that's really typical of what this vineyard has always done.
It's very old world, very European in style. Right? You don't have these big, large, opulent, tannic, high alcohol wines. You have these wines that are very much more secondary, tertiary in tasting notes. They're not relying on alcohol and tannin to get them through. They're relying on complexity and layers, which is very, very kind of old world. New world's very in your face, very opulent. Old world's a little more refined, a little more layered.
And that's a function of climate.
For sure.
Yeah. We have a climate more similar to the old world growing regions as opposed to the new world growing regions. You think hot and dry.
Spain,
Yeah.
California,
Spain, California,
Australia.
South Africa, Australia, whereas we're more analogous to, I think we're on the same latitude as Bordeaux. So, so we're more similar. Our wines are going to be more similar in nature to those. There's going to be complexity and also more diversity from vintage to vintage as opposed to New World wines, which are more consistency from one to the next in terms of the flavor, profiles, that sort of thing. And I think that's better. I think that's makes Virginia wines more interesting.
I've always sort of characterized Virginia wines as fruit character is old world, winemaking styles are new world. We sort of cut that down the middle with others. We certainly have more vintage variation in the new world days.
Well, that as well in Virginia, we have such an incredibly diverse climate where we find our site here, we have Montmorillonite clay, we have fairly high water holding capacity, 900 feet elevation. But then just 40 minutes from here at our site in Granville County, we have the lowest annual precipitation in all of Virginia. Looking at 1,400 feet elevation.
That's the Indian Springs.
That's our Indian, so that's the wine elevation, the third one. And it produces fruit that typically is just much riper. It's higher sugar. So this site is just, you even see just within Virginia, you see all these sites that are more conducive for certain varietals in different areas. So that's why it takes years to figure out which varietal to plant, which site. And once you've determined that success, great, but 9 times out of 10, you have to rip it out and redo it a couple times before you figure out what varietal actually does really well at the sites. And at our Indian Springs site, I can't wait to do a Chardonnay tasting with you guys. With Evil, we can do 2 Chardonnays from Indian Springs and see how wildly different they are. Chardonnay is one of those clones that is very expressive, very expressive of terroir, or the local, the microclimate, the soil, the topography. I guess all vines are, but Chardonnay is just so unique in being able to see, just looking at the clusters, from tasting the berries to making the wines. It's a great varietal to start with if you really want to start nailing down vineyards and site-specific locations. Chardonnay, there's not a whole lot to hide there. There's a lot happening in red wine. So red wines are obviously more complex. They require more blending. There's a lot more happening there. Versus Chardonnay, you can just get the purity of the grape and see the difference of the sites as well. Say Chardonnay is much easier to taste than 3 Cab Francs that are lined up. It would be a lot harder to go through, pick these out, not knowing very much about the site. versus if you started with Chardonnay, it'd be a little easier.
You guys talk about the ageability of this wine.
Sure. So tasting these wines, the ageability kind of comes down to, well, I guess, so you have to ask yourself, what is the ageability? Well, ageability 9 times out of 10 comes down to how the wine is aged. So there are a lot of people who bring their wine home, they put it in their closet and let it sit there, and they're shocked when in 5 years it's not quite where it should be because the temperatures have spiked up and down, it's been humid, it's been hot, it's been cold. So really wine to age well needs a steady constant temperature, certainly below 70 degrees, but really you'd like to be in that 58 to 62 degree range. Reds kind of like something a little bit warmer, whites like something a little cooler. But really, if you're between 58 and 62 degrees, constant temperature, and about 70% relative humidity, the humidity helps preserve the cork more than anything else. You can also lay the wine on the side. If it is a natural cork, that will also keep the cork moist, so they get less oxygen going up in there and prematurely aging the wine. People often ask me about ageability of the wines as well, and it helps us consumers to know the vintage of each wine you're buying. So 2017 is a riper vintage. It's got a lot more structure, a lot more tannin, a lot more acid. These wines have a lot of ageability versus 2016, which is pretty good. I think 2016 was actually a really nice vintage. I'm quite happy with that and the ageability of it. However, 2018, we ended up with wines that didn't quite have the structural integrity. They're wines that I would drink before these wines, to be honest with you. Just because they're going to come into their stride much earlier, they're also going to come out of their stride much earlier. When you're kind of talking about strides and wines, it's like when wines are tasting complete and tasting like you want to keep revisiting them. So Little Way is hitting its stride a little bit earlier. Glenway is coming in a little later, and Indian Springs still, I don't think it's hit it. So these, I would say, Indian Springs is definitely the one that's going to be tasting great 5 to 10 years on. So we're only 3 years into it now. The Glenway will also be another wine that's in that 5 to 10 year range, and then Little Way is going to be it's hitting its stride now. I wouldn't push it much past 8 years of aging, but then again, it depends on what you like. A lot of people, some people like those younger, fresh, more vibrant, fruity wines. Some people like ones that have more age, secondary, tertiary characters, which are a little bit more nutty, less tannin. It's got a brown hue. If you look at the glass, wines that are quite aged, arguably a little past their prime, sometimes are really, really brown hue. Unless it's our port, our tawny port. That's actually what we're looking for, is that very aged character, the very brown character. But first and foremost, when people ask me about aging wines, it's first steady temperature below 70 degrees, preferably between 50 and 62. It's 70% relative humidity, not a lot of jostling, but then understanding what each vintage was, and if it was a really incredible vintage, this wine has more ageability versus wines coming from a different vintage or a less superior vintage. Might have to be drunk a little bit younger. The saddest thing I keep coming across is people who let wines go for too long in their cellar and they're just long in the tooth. And it's like 100% of the time, rather drink a wine just a little bit early than a little bit too late.
Yeah, and Cabernet Franc in general is not normally considered one of those wines you lay down for a long time. When we first started making wines here, people say, how long is wines going to lay down? And I would tell people, 5 years, don't let it go past 10. Well, we drank some of these Glenway wines from 2002, 2003, 2004. They're 15, 16, 17 years old, and they were delicious. But I think those are more the anomalies than anything else. I mean, Cab Franc is a wine that is probably, when you drink any of these in 5 years, I mean, Little Way, I think, is probably in 2 or 3 years is when it's going to really peak. I like to keep some of that fresh fruit. I don't like to let that all disappear into these more aged characters. Glenway and Indian Springs, I think you open these up in 5 years and they're going to be awesome. And as Theo said, way better to drink it a year or two early than a year or two too late. I think when I age wines, 90% of the time I'm pulling them out and disappointed. Let it go just a little too long.
Well, I think our club has a really good idea of how to do it. I think a lot of you guys buy the wines by the case and you drink them periodically, you mark down what you think of the wine at that time. And I think it's the best way to do it for your own palate is buy 6 bottles of the same wine, drink it a year, drink it after a few years, and just make little post-it notes and stick them on the bottle so you know where you think it's at.
Drink half, save half, and then call me, get more.
I have a 3-part question. Number 1, which grapes did we use in our original vintages of Cabernet Franc? Part 2 question is, what is our white label Cabernet Franc? And part 3 is, why did we do the different vineyard designated?
Great questions.
Great question.
Yeah.
So I'll speak to our original Cabernet Francs. Our first vintage was year 2000. Our vines were still babies, weren't producing. That vintage was from a Yeast vineyard that was down on Highway 211 near Little Washington. It's not there any longer. It was the old Blue Rock Inn vineyard. We leased it for the year. We made our original wines in 2000 from there. From 2001 forward, up until we started taking the Indian Springs fruit, they were almost always 100% blend white from the vineyard here on the estate. And I'll let you speak to the white label. I think you just looked at that.
I was actually just looking at the notes, our notes for what we did for the white label, the black label, and the vineyard designated Cab Franc. So when we go through and make decisions based on what we have in the cellar, what we've picked, and we try to fill certain programs. So we typically work backwards. We work with our black label program, kind of work backwards. Our white label will not always be 100% Cabernet Franc. We'll sometimes need to work in other varietals into that to fill holes. So like our 2017 white label Cab Franc had 7% Merlot and 11% Cabernet Sauvignon. So that's, yes, it's technically still a Cabernet Franc, but it has a little bit of other varietals in there. And what we're doing there is trying to fill holes. We're trying to bring other components that wines have that maybe the wine that we're looking to build doesn't have. And that's really where blending comes in handy. And that's why we're so fortunate here, is because we have so many blending opportunities. Even in the Indian Springs vineyard, there are now 4 different blocks of Cabernet Franc. And each block is a different age, different parts of the vineyard. It's a 60-acre vineyard. So sitting on a slightly different soil type, slightly different elevation, planted slightly different age. So when we go through, we're picking 4 different blocks of Cabernet Franc. They all get vinified. They all get fermented. They're kept separate all the way until the end. When we start going through and working our way through barrels and trying to figure out which goes where. So it's nice. Why we came up with doing the vineyard designated Cab Francs is partly selfish, because we have 3 vineyards that we want to see. They've been blended together for so long. We'd like to see how they age independently of each other. And so this is a very educational experience for us to see how they all age independently. But then if we were to go through and do this again, we would know how we would make changes and adjustments to it.
And it's fun.
And it's fun. It's
Allows us to do this.
Yeah, it allows us to do this. Yeah, exactly.
So
So
I think playing off of that, you take something like the Little Way. It's got this upfront, aromatic, fresh fruit character. You got a little earthiness going on with the Glenway. You've got some real great structure in the Indian Springs. Normally, we would put those together, and the 1 + 1 + 1 equals 4, or equals 5, or equals 6. But this was really a lot of fun to be able to keep these separate. And yes, we keep them separate in the cellar for 8, 10, 12 months. But until you have them in the bottle at the age of the bottle for a while, you don't really know how these wines are going to react on their own. So, as Theo said, it's an educational experience for us. And it's fun. We did about 200 cases of each of these 3 different wines. And, not a lot of wine for us, but enough to people can get it and taste them separately. And so, great question. And I think, by the way, going back to Theo's comment on ageability, one of the things that starts to give away ageability a little bit is letting these wines sit in glasses like this and go back to them, and you'll start to get, you're just super aging them over the course of an hour here, but you can watch how they change just in the glass. And, something like the Little Way, which we talked about, didn't have quite the aging potential that maybe Glenway or Union Springs has, after an hour or two in glass, it starts to get a little flabby. That fruit character starts to mutate a bit. Something like the Indian Springs just gets kind of better and better here. And it's a real sign to me that, aging-wise, this wine's going to continue to get better over time. And it's still, when you first pour it, it's pretty tight. And it's got a great structure, but it needs some more time. Which would never answer the food pairing on Indian Springs. Because of its structure right now, it needs something
Prime rib.
prime rib.
Mm.
I actually, if you enjoy red wine with cheeses, some really hard, you like this, Sharon?
Oh, yeah. I can have cheese and wine every night. My husband's like, please, can I have a meal?
Let's get some hard, strong cheese with it. I can see that. So, Kelly, got more questions? Nope. Oh my gosh. Okay.
So when it comes down to when we're actually making these wines, so you can see how they age independently of each other, and you can kind of reflect back on how the wines are made and different strategies, and getting a big part of red winemaking is managing tannins and managing extraction, because you can either overly extract a wine or not extract enough of this of the good stuff. And when we're talking about extraction, we're typically talking about color and tannin. So there are different ways you can do that. When the fruit comes in, we'll separate it from the stems and just get whole berries. If it's a smaller lot of fruit, it will go into bins, kind of 1-ton bins. And then if it's a larger lot of fruit, it will go through a pump and go pump inside into a large tank. So the difference in extraction methods is either a pump over or a punch down. A punch down is just taking essentially a long stainless steel rod. It's got a large kind of cylinder head on the front of it, and you just literally push the cap down. So you're incorporating all the grapes that are fermenting into the fermentation. You can do this once a day or twice a day. You can do it every 2 hours. So when we talk about extractions, the more often you incorporate the cap, I should backtrack for a second. As the yeast eat the sugar, they produce a lot of CO2 and ethanol. The CO2 pushes all of your grape seeds and skins and pulp up to the top of the fermentation. And you have all the fermenting juice in the bottom. When you have that cap sitting at the top, that's kind of all your good stuff right there. So you want to incorporate that into the fermentation. So we can punch it down, we can pump the bottom of the juice over, and it's that kind of fireman blast and break apart that way. But if we do it every 2 hours, we get obviously an incredible amount of extraction, versus if we do it at every day or once a day, twice a day, then we get a little less extraction. We also play around with heat of fermentations. We can push fermentations up to about 92, 94 degrees. Anything above that, then we start killing yeast off. But the higher the temperature, it's called thermal vinification. The higher temperature, the more extraction you get. So there's just a number of different tools or techniques or styles of winemaking you can use for different sites or different styles of wine. So little way, as we're seeing, given the site, given the age of the grapes, this is something that we're going to want to push for a few more years to be more on the fruit forward side. Perhaps it doesn't have the tannin already in the grapes coming in, that we can push it to get a lot of extraction in that sense. So what we'll do slightly cooler fermentations on this, and try to really accentuate and highlight the fruitiness of the wine, and not try to create something that's not, which is get a lot of extraction, a lot of tannin in there that doesn't have. That can lead to kind of a disjointed or kind of a clunky wine. The Glenway and the Indian Springs, both of these wines are definitely riper fruit coming in, and we know there's more tannin, so we can push the extraction a little bit further, push temperature a little higher.
So questions, do we use the same type of yeast with 3 different?
Great question. Probably not. We play around a lot with yeast in the cellar, and even like if Indian Springs came in, that was the 98 block. The 98 block went into probably 4 different tanks and probably had 4 different yeast he was on. Yeast all have differing abilities as far as their fermentation kinetics, their ability to ferment to dryness or to completely convert all the sugar into ethanol. Some yeast are really efficient at converting all the yeast or all the sugar to ethanol. Some are a little less efficient. Some will plow through fermentation in 4 days. Some will take 4 months, some will never finish. Not very often, but sometimes it does happen. Some yeast will release a lot of aromatic, a lot of volatile aroma compounds to the wine. Some yeast are high polysaccharide producers, so some yeast will impart the richness and the sweetness to the wine. So all of these yeasts have different abilities to do different things, and it takes a long time. It's as hard as working with vineyards, I would say, as working with yeasts to figure out which yeast does what you want to do on a certain block of grapes. And that is it takes a lot of time and effort, and a lot of tasting, which Alan is very helpful with. As he walks and stumbles down the stairs.
Hello, Alan.
Yeah.
Wait, hold on, I gotta get in here further.
Get in.
I'm in the glare and I'm very helpful with the tasting. Yep. All right, back to it.
How about alcohol percentages in each of these three?
Oh, good.
That's a great question. So,
Let's look. I should have written that down.
14.2 for the Glenway.
How much?
14.2.
14.2.
14.7 for a little way.
Indian Springs is also 14.2.
Yeah, so this was a high alcohol year, really.
Yeah.
It was a dry
2017
year.
Which it actually kind of explains something. If you notice the 14.2 for the Glenway and the Indian Springs, that kind of seems in check. That's a fairly high alcohol wine, but it's very balanced versus 14.7 here. You taste that alcohol kind of sits, it's not in sync with the rest of the wine. If this wine was perhaps a little lower in alcohol, then it might there wouldn't be this clunkiness or this kind of, I get this a little bit of a disjointed character at the back of the palate. So maybe if that alcohol was more in line, so that would tell me maybe if we see this coming in, it's super ripe, and it's got a lot of sugar in there, you need to be using a yeast that's a little less efficient at converting all that sugar to ethanol. So we want less ethanol in the final product. We'd like a little more other things. We can have a little more balances, a little more, again, you get either ethanol or you can get polysaccharides and aminoproteins. So we'd like to see a little less ethanol, a little more polysaccharide and aminoproteins, which imparts kind of a roundness on the palate. So again, that's what's nice about keeping these things vinified and aging separately, is you can see how they age and then reflect upon how they're made and kind of tweak your decision making the following year.
Okay. I think that at some point you guys need to do a recap on the 3 wines, basic, and what they pair best with.
Want to repeat the question and go?
Okay, so that was a question, or that was your question, Kelly?
It's a combination.
Combination question. Okay, recap 3 wines and give pairings.
Mhm.
Okay, so to recap, Little Way is for lack of a better descriptor, a smaller wine. I don't mean smaller as in bad, but it is bright fruit. It's got it's ready to drink now. It's not a wine that's going to benefit greatly from age.
And it's called Little Way.
It's called Little Way. But it does have that nice fruit. It's a little lighter in style, even though it's 2017. Because all these wines they're always, I think they're all really nice Cabernet Francs. The Glenway, Sherry's favorite, is that European, earthy, little herbal, I think nice balance on the palate, nice finish. This wine is very drinkable right now. I think it's going to age really well for another 5, 6, 7, 8 years. If it went to 15, it wouldn't surprise me, but I wouldn't be a person who would stick that in my cellar for that long. Maybe a bottle just for the heck of it stuck back there. Indian Springs, much bigger structure. It needs more time right now. It either needs more time or it needs a food that's got a fair amount of acid and really stand up to the wine. Theo said prime rib, some really hard, strong cheese, something of that nature. Glenway just screams lamb to me. That's anybody else got ideas on food?
Lamb and mint jelly.
Yeah.
Good.
Oh yeah, get your mint jelly working. I think the Little Way is to me it's more it's an appetizer wine. It's a little lighter in style. You said
Pizza one.
pizza wine. Oh, good point. Good point. Pizza wine. You said drink by the glass on its own. I totally agree with that. I think Cabernet Franc. The great news about Cabernet Franc, it is, as far as red wines go, very versatile with food. Mm-hmm. It's not like a big Cabernet that will overpower a bunch of foods. But as you can see in the Glenway and Indian Springs, it's going to hold up to most anything. but it's not going to overpower much of anything either. So I know it probably sounds a little bit incongruent,
But if you think about Cabernet Franc, I mean, in saying that, we make a few different styles. We do our vineyards like Cabernet Franc, which is again a little younger, a little more fruit forward. But then if you think about our 18 blend, that is predominantly Cabernet Franc. And then also our sparkling red is predominantly Cabernet Franc as well. So you can see how versatile this grape is, and why, I mean, traditionally it's used as a blended grape because it is versatile and you can apply it in a lot of different ways, a lot of different styles. So that's why it is.
unless you're in the Loire.
Unless you're in the Loire, you can only do one thing with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you guys all tell us your individual favorites? We know Sherry loves the Glenway. That's a question.
Yeah, I would share it in one way, right? I mean, for as the wines are tasting right now, my palate gravitates towards the Glenway, only because I think Little Way is tasting great and it's very approachable. However, I think there's still a couple holes there versus Glenway, which for me is tasting quite complete. And Indian Springs, I think in 5 years would probably be my favorite, and it's just not hitting in stride yet.
Totally agree with that. How about you, Teresa?
I actually like the Indian Springs the best. I find that to be the most approachable for me.
Tommy?
Glenway.
Glenway.
All right.
I think Glenway is,
Connected to that.
Glenway is kind of what we hope and expect character-wise, or used to maybe. Very, very, it screams Virginia coming from. I think the Indian Springs is, in a good way, it is uncharacteristic of Virginia. It tends to, I would characterize that as a little bit more of a New World California style Cabernet Franc. So, but yeah, Glenway's right now, right for. Yeah.
Well, thank
Any
you.
more questions? Well, look, should we give an update real quick of what the governor came out with today?
Yeah.
So we were hoping for a lot more with Governor Northam's relaxing our quarantine. I guess next Friday starts the Safer at Home. We thought that we were going to get some indoor service, but it turned out that we are being treated as restaurants. So it will be outdoor seating only at half capacity and properly socially distanced. So the good news is next Friday we can start to host people back on the property. Bad news is we can't host you inside, other than we will continue our carry-out wine, curbside wine, free shipping as we've been doing. So everything that's been in place is still in place. What we get to add to it is you can come here if you are comfortable doing that and having a bottle and sitting out outside. We'll take away some seating off the patios to properly socially distance that. We may even go buy some more picnic tables because we've got plenty of big lawn space to spread those out really well. But we'll have outdoor seating. It looks like that weekend the weather's going to be okay. Maybe a scattered shower here or there. It'll be into the 70s weather-wise. So outdoors may work at least the weekend of 14, 15, 16. So
Group sizes.
maximum group size is 10 people, strictly enforced. They made that really, really clear. You can't have two groups come and people migrate between groups. So there's some things like that. So we will be doing our best to make sure that everybody adheres. But so maximum group size is 10. And they talk about that as 10 people who come here together, stay together and meet together. So we don't know how long until we get the indoor service back. All the initial information on the governor's office was we were going to restaurants and wineries and so forth were going to get some indoor service, but when they finally came out with the regs today, that was not part of it. So that's our new operating.
Phase one.
Standard operating
Phase one.
procedure.
Phase one, phase
Hopefully,
one.
hopefully we'll get phase 2 and out of this. Yeah,
Do we know what we're tasting next week or next week?
we don't have that scheduled yet, but good question. Theo's was asking when we're going to do this again. We will get that out to you in an email. We think we will do it with the next club shipment, but that will depend a little bit. That's going to be timed with the new opening outside, so we'll see how that's going. But please give us your feedback.
Yes,
I know this was awkward. Our technology was not what we wanted it to be. We all had mics, and at the last minute, they didn't work with the computer, so now we're talking to you from afar to one microphone. If you enjoyed the format, if you'd like to see changes in the format, I know this tasting format's a little wine geeky, as I mentioned, but if you like it, great. If you don't, tell us what you would like, and we'll take all that into consideration and try to schedule the next one. So until then, be safe and be well, please, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you all. Have a great
Cheers.
weekend.
Happy Mother's
Everybody,
Day.
cheers.
Happy Mother's Day.
Oh,
Happy Mother's Day.
Yeah, I got those 3-packs. Give me a call.
Nice, Sherry.
Way to go, Sherry.
Cheers. Take care, everybody.
Cheers, everybody.
Oh, yeah.